The chilly morning air nipped at her fingers as she carefully arranged the worn blankets in their usual corner of Madison Street. Her little girl was still fast asleep, curled up like a small kitten in the makeshift bed they'd created behind an old cardboard box. The mother couldn't help but smile, despite their circumstances. Her daughter looked so peaceful, clutching the tattered stuffed rabbit they'd managed to keep through all their hardships. Life hadn't always been this way. Just 3 months ago, they had a cozy one-bedroom apartment with flowery curtains and a tiny kitchen where they'd make pancakes every Sunday morning. But then came the accident, the mounting hospital bills, and the cruel reality that even her 2 jobs couldn't keep up with the expenses. Their savings disappeared faster than autumn leaves in the wind, and soon they found themselves living in their old Honda Civic until that too was taken away. The mother checked her daughter's forehead, still warm, but not as concerning as last night. The medicine they'd gotten from the free clinic was helping, but they needed proper food and rest. Fishing through their bag, she pulled out their last granola bar and set it aside for when her little one would wake up. The street was beginning to buzz with early morning commuters. She smoothed down her cleanest shirt, the blue one she'd carefully washed in the shelter's bathroom sink last night, and cleared her throat. Music had always been her escape, her passion since childhood. Her grandmother used to say she sang before she could talk, and now it was their only source of income. "When you wish upon a star," she began softly, her voice carrying clear and pure across the morning air. A few early birds paused, coffee cups in hand, to listen. Her voice grew stronger with each note, years of training shining through despite her circumstances. This wasn't just singing for spare change. This was a mother's love transformed into melody, a prayer for a better tomorrow wrapped in music. The morning crowd started to build, a steady stream of suits and steaming coffee cups rushing past. Most hurried by, eyes glued to phones or watches, but some slowed their pace. An elderly man dropped a few coins in her paper cup. A young woman in scrubs left a sandwich from her lunch bag, small kindnesses that meant the world. Behind her, she heard her daughter stirring. The little girl had learned to wake up quietly, a skill no 6-year-old should have to master. Their morning routine was down to an art now, sharing the granola bar, using bottled water to brush teeth, and making sure her daughter's school uniform, donated by a kind teacher, stayed clean and pressed. "Mommy, your voice sounds tired," her daughter whispered, concerned eyes looking up at her. She was right. 3 days of nearly non-stop singing had taken its toll. But they needed just a little more for tonight's shelter fee, and maybe enough for some cold medicine. "Just warming up, sweetheart," she replied, managing a bright smile. "Why don't you help me with this next one? Remember the song we used to sing in the car?" Together, they started "Somewhere Over the Rainbow," their voices blending in perfect harmony. The mother's rich, trained vocals supporting her daughter's sweet, clear notes. More people began to stop, touched by the sight of the small girl standing proudly next to her mother, singing her heart out despite their obvious hardships. The morning sun climbed higher, warming their Coma slightly. The mother kept singing, one song flowing into another, traditional ballads mixing with classic jazz standards. Her daughter swayed beside her, occasionally joining in on songs she knew, carefully counting the money people dropped in their cup. They had a system. Coins went into the dinner fund, bills into their new home fund, though the latter remained desperately thin. Traffic began to build on the street beside them, cars inching forward in the morning rush. The mother didn't notice the expensive cars anymore. They rarely stopped, their windows usually rolled up tight against the world outside. She just kept singing, her voice carrying hope and heartache in equal measure, not knowing that her entire world was about to change with the simple turn of a luxury car's wheel. The afternoon sun beat down on the busy street corner, but most people barely noticed the mother and daughter duo anymore. They'd become just another part of the urban landscape, like the newspaper stand or the hot dog cart down the block. The mother's throat felt like sandpaper, each note becoming more of a struggle than the last. "Here, Mummy," her little girl whispered, offering her their last bottle of water. The mother's heart squeezed tight in her chest. Even at 6, her daughter showed more kindness and understanding than most adults who passed them by. She took a small sip, saving most of it for her little one, who still had a slight fever from the night before. A businessman walked past, then stopped and backed up a few steps. He dropped a $5 bill in their cup, nodding respectfully. "My mother used to sing that song," he said softly, before disappearing back into the crowd. The mother smiled. It was these small connections that kept her going, these tiny threads of humanity in a world that often felt cold and indifferent. Her daughter sat cross-legged on their cleanest blanket, carefully doing her homework. They'd managed to keep her in school by using their old address, and her teacher had been understanding enough to look the other way. Education was their ticket out of this situation. The mother was determined that her daughter wouldn't lose that opportunity, no matter how tough things got. "Look, Mummy," her daughter exclaimed quietly, holding up her math worksheet. "Perfect scores again." The mother paused between songs to give her a proud hug, fighting back tears. Her little girl was so brave, never complaining about their situation, always trying to find the bright side of things. The lunch crowd had thinned out, leaving mainly tourists and a few stragglers from nearby offices. The mother switched to more upbeat songs, trying to catch people's attention. Moon River flowed into What a Wonderful World, her voice carrying the weight of irony in those hopeful lyrics. A young couple stopped to listen, the woman wiping away a tear before dropping some money in their cup. Their own lunch had been meager, half a sandwich shared between them, donated by a kind soul earlier that morning. The mother's stomach growled, but she ignored it. She'd gotten good at ignoring hunger pangs over the past few months. Her daughter's next meal was all that mattered. A group of school kids passed by, some pointing and whispering. The mother watched her daughter shrink slightly behind her homework, trying to make herself invisible. These moments were the hardest, when her bright, social butterfly of a child had to hide from her peers, ashamed of their circumstances. The mother sang louder, her voice carrying a hint of defiance against the cruel twists of fate that had brought them here. Their cup was still disappointingly light. Today had been slower than usual, and they needed at least enough for the shelter fee tonight. The thought of spending another night in the park, especially with her daughter's fever, made the mother's voice quaver slightly. But she squared her shoulders and kept singing. They'd survived worse days. They would survive this one too. A passing street cleaner gave them a sympathetic smile, the same one who'd helped them find this relatively safe corner 3 months ago. He told them which streets to avoid, which shelters were best for families, which cops were kind and which weren't. These small kindnesses from strangers had become their lifeline. The mother started another song, her voice growing hoarse, but still carrying the trained precision from years of practice. She wondered what her old vocal coach would think, seeing her now. But then her daughter joined in softly on the chorus, their voices blending in perfect harmony, and nothing else mattered. Music had always been their special bond, from lullabies to car ride sing-alongs. Now it was their survival tool, their way of showing the world they were still here, still fighting, still human. Traffic was getting heavier as rush hour approached. The endless stream of cars barely caught her attention anymore, until one particular vehicle slowed down, its window rolling down smoothly in their direction. The mother kept singing, used to false hopes, not knowing that this moment would mark the beginning of a remarkable change in their lives. The evening shadows were growing longer, and with them, the mother's anxiety deepened. Her little girl's forehead felt warmer than before, and the small cough that had started this morning was getting worse. The streets were emptying as businesses closed their doors, and their cup held barely enough for a simple meal, let alone medicine. She pulled their last clean blanket tighter around her daughter's shoulders. The little girl had stopped doing her homework, too tired to focus on the math problems she usually loved. Instead, she leaned against her mother's leg, her eyes heavy with fever. The sight made the mother's heart ache, but she kept singing, her voice carrying more raw emotion than ever before. "Somewhere over the rainbow," she began, her voice cracking slightly from exhaustion and worry. A few last-minute shoppers hurried past, their shopping bags swinging, heads down against the cooling evening breeze. The mother's voice grew stronger with each note, as if she could somehow sing away her daughter's fever, their hunger, their situation. Her little girl started to shiver despite the blanket. The mother paused her singing just long enough to pull her daughter closer, rubbing her arms to warm her up. "Just a little longer, sweetheart," she whispered, though she wasn't sure what she was waiting for anymore. Their usual spot near the pharmacy was empty now, the sidewalk growing darker as the streetlights flickered to life. The mother's throat felt like she'd swallowed glass, but she started another song. This time, it was Amazing Grace, the old hymn her grandmother used to sing during tough times. Tears streamed down her face as she sang, but her voice remained strong, filled with a mixture of desperation and determination that seemed to float on the evening air. Traffic had slowed to an occasional car, most people already home with their families. The mother watched a woman in a restaurant across the street hugging her child, and her voice wavered for a moment. She remembered when she used to do that: pick up her daughter from school, take her to dinner, tuck her into a real bed at night. Now they had nothing but each other and the songs that kept them going. Her daughter's cough grew worse, a harsh sound that echoed off the empty storefront windows. The mother's singing faltered as she reached for their water bottle, only to find it empty. Panic started to rise in her chest. They needed help, but the free clinic was closed, and they didn't have enough money for medicine. Still, she forced herself to keep singing. It was all she could do. Her voice carried down the empty street, a melody of heartache and hope mixed together. Bridge over troubled water flowed from her lips, each word feeling like a prayer. Her daughter stirred slightly, mumbling something about being cold despite the blanket. The sound of an approaching car barely registered. She'd learned not to get her hopes up. But this one was different. The quiet power of its expensive engine slowed to a stop near their corner. Through her tears, she could make out the sleek shape of a luxury car, its window rolling down slowly. The mother's voice didn't falter. She'd learned to sing through everything life had thrown at them. But her heart began to race as the car's interior light revealed a well-dressed person listening intently. She couldn't see their face clearly, but she could feel their gaze, not judgmental or pitying, but genuinely moved by her song. Her daughter lifted her head slightly, curious about the stopped car. The mother squeezed her hand gently, continuing to sing as if this moment might shatter if she stopped. The last notes of her song hung in the air, mixing with the distant city sounds and her daughter's soft coughing. For a moment, everything was still. Then the car door opened and footsteps approached their corner. The mother held her daughter closer, years of street-learned caution kicking in. But something about this person's approach was different, careful, respectful, almost hesitant. As they stepped into the streetlight's glow, the mother realized this wasn't just another passerby. This was someone who had truly stopped to listen, and that simple act was about to change everything. The luxury car's headlights cast long shadows on the empty street as its owner stepped into view. He was a middle-aged man in a well-tailored suit, carrying himself with the confidence of someone used to being in charge. But there was something gentle in his expression as he approached, his footsteps deliberately slow and non-threatening. The mother instinctively pulled her daughter closer, years of street wisdom making her cautious. Her little girl's fever-warm body pressed against her side, reminding her of how desperate their situation had become. Still, she kept her chin up, maintaining her dignity even as her heart raced with uncertainty. "I've been sitting in traffic for the past 10 minutes, the man said softly, keeping a respectful distance. "I couldn't drive away without telling you. Your voice, it's extraordinary." His words carried genuine amazement, freed from the usual pity they received. "The way you sang Amazing Grace. I haven't heard anything like that in 20 years of running my studio." The mother's breath caught in her throat. Her daughter looked up at her with tired but curious eyes, still wrapped in their last clean blanket. The man reached slowly into his pocket, and the mother tensed, but he only pulled out a business card. The street light revealed its glossy surface. It belonged to one of the city's most prestigious recording studios. "Inon Pacific Recording Studios," he explained, his voice growing animated. "The raw emotion in your voice, the technical control even after hours of singing, it's remarkable. When did you train?" The question wasn't accusatory, just professionally curious. The mother swallowed hard, memories flooding back. "I studied music in college," she said quietly, her voice rough from the day's singing. Before, she glanced down at her daughter, not needing to finish the sentence. Her little girl coughed again, the sound making the man's expression shift from professional interest to genuine concern. He looked at their meager belongings, the nearly empty cup, the worn blankets, then back at the mother's proud but exhausted face. Without hesitation, he reached for his wallet. "First, let's get your daughter some medicine and both of you somewhere warm for the night." He pulled out several bills, enough for a decent hotel room and medications. "Tomorrow morning, I'd like you to come to my studio. No strings attached, just a chance to talk." The mother's hands trembled as she accepted the money, tears threatening to spill over. She started, but her daughter's cough interrupted her. The man's kind eyes crinkled at the corners. There's a pharmacy 2 blocks over that's still open, and a good hotel just beyond that. Get some rest, both of you. Here's my card. Come by the studio whenever you're ready tomorrow. He started to turn away, then paused. You know, I've auditioned hundreds of singers, but none with the soul you put into those old songs. Music like that, it deserves to be heard. With that, he walked back to his car, leaving the mother standing there, holding the business card like it might disappear if she gripped it too tightly. Her daughter tugged at her sleeve. Mommy, are we really going to sleep in a real bed tonight? The hope in her voice made the mother's heart twist. She looked down at the money in her hand, then at the business card gleaming under the street light. After months of closed doors and turned backs, someone had finally stopped to listen. The luxury car pulled away smoothly, its taillights disappearing around the corner. The mother quickly packed their few belongings, her hands shaking slightly. Her daughter's forehead still felt warm, but her eyes were brighter now, excitement replacing some of the fever's glaze. As they walked toward the pharmacy, the mother clutched the business card tightly. She didn't allow herself to hope too much yet. Life had taught her harsh lessons about that. But for the first time in months, she felt something shift inside her. Her voice, the one thing she'd managed to hold onto through everything, might finally help them find their way back home. The street lights guided their way, and for once, the mother didn't mind the darkness falling around them. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring, but tonight, at least, her daughter would sleep in a real bed, with medicine to ease her fever. Sometimes, she thought, all it takes is for the right person to stop and listen. The mother's hands trembled as she turned the key to their new apartment. It wasn't much. A tiny one-bedroom unit in a modest building, but after months of homelessness, it felt like a palace. Her daughter bounced excitedly beside her, clutching her beloved stuffed rabbit as the door swung open. Empty walls and bare floors greeted them, but the space held infinite possibility. Sunlight streamed through clean windows, casting warm patches on the carpet. The kitchen was small but functional, with a working stove and refrigerator. Their footsteps echoed in the empty rooms as they explored their new home. "Look, Mummy." "A real bathroom," her daughter exclaimed, her voice filled with wonder as she discovered the bathtub. The mother's eyes welled up, remembering how they'd had to rely on shelter facilities and public restrooms for so long. Such simple things now felt like incredible luxuries. They didn't have furniture yet, just their few belongings in 2 small bags. But the studio owner had arranged for a delivery later that day: 2 beds, basic furniture, and some essential supplies. The advance he provided would help them get started, though the mother was determined to pay back every penny through her work. Her daughter ran from room to room, already planning where her school books would go, where she'd do her homework, where they could put up pictures. The mother watched her, heart full of emotion. For the first time in months, her little girl looked completely carefree, the weight of their situation temporarily lifted from her young shoulders. A knock at the door announced the arrival of their first visitor, one of the backup singers from the studio, a kind-faced woman carrying bags of groceries. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said warmly, stepping inside. "We all pitched in to get you some essentials." Behind her, 2 more studio musicians appeared with more bags, cleaning supplies, and even some simple curtains. The mother tried to protest, overwhelmed by their generosity, but they wouldn't hear of it. "We're a family at the studio," the woman explained, already unpacking groceries into the kitchen cabinets. "And family takes care of each other." Her daughter watched in amazement as their empty kitchen slowly filled with food, real food, not just the cheap snacks and donated items they'd survived on for months. The furniture arrived next, and the studio musicians stayed to help set everything up. The mother's voice caught in her throat as she watched them transform the empty apartment into a home. They hung curtains, made beds, arranged the small dining table, and even set up a desk for her daughter's homework. Her little girl couldn't contain her excitement when she saw her bed. A real bed with clean sheets and a colorful comforter. One of the musicians had even brought a small bedside lamp shaped like a star. "For keeping the bad dreams away," he said with a gentle smile, remembering their story. As the day went on, more people from the studio dropped by, each bringing something to help make the apartment feel like home. Someone brought pots and pans. Another brought towels and bathroom supplies, and one even arrived with a small television and some books for her daughter. The mother stood in the middle of this whirlwind of kindness, trying to process how much their lives had changed in just 24 hours. Yesterday, they'd been on the street, her daughter sick, their future uncertain. Now, they had a home, she had a job, and most importantly, they had people who cared. Late in the afternoon, after everyone had left, mother and daughter sat on their new couch, taking in their transformed living space. The setting sun cast a golden glow through their new curtains, and the apartment smelled of fresh linens and the dinner their new friends had helped them prepare. "Is this really ours, Mommy?" her daughter asked softly, still seeming afraid it might all disappear. The mother pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her freshly washed hair. They'd both taken long, hot showers in their very own bathroom. "Yes, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "This is really ours." She looked around at their new home, humble but filled with hope and kindness. Tomorrow, she would start her new job at the studio, but tonight, they would sleep in real beds in their own home, surrounded by the evidence that even in the darkest times, human kindness could light the way forward. The recording studio hummed with activity as the mother stood behind the microphone, headphones pressed to her ears. It had been 3 weeks since that life-changing night, and she was gradually finding her footing in this new world. The sound engineer gave her a thumbs up through the glass, and the music began to play in her ears. Her voice, now well-rested and stronger than ever, blended perfectly with the track. She'd spent the past weeks doing backup vocals for various artists, each session building her confidence. The other singers had taken her under their wing, teaching her the ropes of studio recording and making her feel like part of their musical family. During breaks, she'd check her phone, a simple prepaid model gifted by the studio staff, to make sure her daughter was okay. The little girl was thriving in her after-school program, no longer having to hide their situation from teachers and friends. Her grades, already good, had improved even more now that she had a proper place to study and regular meals. The mother's thoughts drifted to their apartment as she waited for the next recording take. They'd slowly made it more like home, adding small touches here and there with her first paychecks. A potted plant in the window, colorful drawings by her daughter on the fridge, a soft rug in the living room, each item a symbol of their growing stability. That was perfect. The sound engineer's voice crackled through her headphones, pulling her back to the present. "You've got a real gift for harmonies." The mother smiled, remembering how she used to dream of moments like this back in college. Life had taken a different turn then, but somehow she'd found her way back to music. During lunch break, she sat with the other backup singers in the studio's small break room. They shared stories and laughs, treating her like she'd always been part of their group. One of them mentioned an upcoming project. A major artist needed backup vocals for their new album. "You should definitely audition," they encouraged. "Your voice would be perfect for it." The mother tucked that information away, still amazed at how quickly her life had changed. Just a month ago, she'd been singing on the streets for spare change. Now she was recording in a professional studio, earning a steady income and, most importantly, providing a stable life for her daughter. After the session, she walked to her daughter's school, something she'd never been able to do during their homeless days. The autumn air was crisp, but she wore a warm coat now, another gift from her studio family. She arrived just as the children were being dismissed, and her heart swelled as she watched her little girl run toward her, backpack bouncing, a paper clutched in her hand. "Look, Mommy," her daughter exclaimed, holding up a math test with a big A+ at the top. "And my teacher says I can join the school choir." The mother hugged her tightly, remembering how they used to sing together on their street corner. Now her daughter could pursue music in a proper setting with proper guidance. They walked home together, hand in hand, as her daughter chatted about her day. They passed their old corner, and the mother felt a mix of emotions, gratitude for how far they'd come, and compassion for others still struggling. She'd started leaving coffee and sandwiches there some mornings, remembering the kindness of strangers during their own difficult times. At home, they settled into their evening routine. The mother helped with homework while dinner cooked in their small kitchen, real food they'd bought themselves, not donated items or shelter meals. Her daughter sat at her little desk, the star-shaped lamp casting a warm glow as she worked on her math problems. Later, as they sat down to eat, her daughter asked, "Can we sing our special song?" The mother smiled, remembering how they used to sing "Somewhere Over the Rainbow" on the streets. Now they sang it in their own home, their voices blending together in the cozy apartment, the song carrying a new meaning of hope fulfilled. As she tucked her daughter into bed that night, the mother thought about the studio owner and how his simple act of stopping to listen had changed their lives. She hummed softly, watching her little girl drift off to sleep, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring another day of stability, music, and hope. 6 months had passed since that fateful night on the street corner. The mother sat in the studio's main recording room, listening to the playback of her vocals on a new indie album. Her voice, once used to beg for spare change, now filled the professional space with warmth and depth that had industry professionals taking notice. The studio owner entered, holding a magazine that featured a small article about their story. Someone had recognized her from their days on the street and written about their journey. The piece hadn't used their names. The mother had requested privacy for her daughter's sake, but it had sparked interest in the local music community. "You're becoming quite the talk of the industry," the studio owner said with a proud smile. "3 major labels have called asking about you this week." The mother's hands trembled slightly as she held the magazine. The article had also mentioned her efforts to help other homeless families, something she'd started doing quietly with her newfound stability. Later that afternoon, she visited the local shelter where they'd once stayed. But this time, she came as a volunteer, not a resident. She'd started a small music program there, teaching simple songs to children who reminded her so much of her own daughter during their hardest days. The shelter director had noticed how the music lifted spirits, bringing moments of joy to families facing their own struggles. Her daughter often came with her to these sessions, helping to hand out sheet music and encourage other children to join in. Today, they were teaching Amazing Grace to a group of young kids. The mother watched her little girl gently guide a shy young boy to join the group, showing the same kindness others had shown them. "Your story gives them hope," the shelter director told her quietly, watching the children sing. "They see that things can get better." The mother nodded, remembering her own days of doubt and despair. She'd started bringing food and supplies regularly, using part of her earnings to help others as she'd been helped. At home that evening, she found a letter from her daughter's school. Opening it nervously, she discovered it was an invitation. They'd wanted her to speak at a career day event about her work in the music industry. The mother sat down, overwhelmed by how far they'd come. Her daughter was now proudly telling friends about her mom, the professional singer, instead of hiding their circumstances. The phone rang. It was one of the backup singers, now a close friend, calling about an exciting opportunity. A famous artist was looking for opening acts for their upcoming local concert, and her name had been mentioned. The mother listened, hardly daring to believe it. From street corner to concert hall. It seemed impossible, yet here was the chance. Her daughter came running in from her room, eager to show off her latest art project. It was a drawing of their old street corner, but with a surprising addition. A rainbow arching over the spot where they used to sing. "City Mommy." "That's where our rainbow ended," she explained with the simple wisdom of childhood. The mother pulled her daughter close, remembering all those times they'd sung "Somewhere Over the Rainbow" together in the cold. Now they had a real home, warm beds, full bellies, and most importantly, a chance to help others find their own rainbows. Before bed, they stood at their apartment window, looking out at the city lights. The mother pointed to their old corner, barely visible in the distance. "Should we sing it?" she asked softly. Her daughter nodded, and together they sang their special song, their voices carrying hope into the night air. As she tucked her daughter into bed, the mother noticed something remarkable. The worry lines that had aged her little girl during their homeless days had completely disappeared. In their place was the carefree expression every child deserved to wear. "Mommy," her daughter whispered as she drifted off to sleep, "I'm glad that car stopped to listen." The mother kissed her daughter's forehead, then went to her own room to practice for tomorrow's recording session. On her dresser sat the business card that had changed their lives, now framed as a reminder that miracles can happen in the most unexpected moments. She began to sing softly, her voice carrying the story of their journey in every note, a story she was now ready to share with the world. 1 year to the day since a luxury car had stopped at their street corner, the mother stood backstage at the city's largest concert hall. Her heart raced as she heard the murmur of the gathering crowd beyond the curtain. This wasn't just another backup singing job. Tonight she would perform her own songs at a benefit concert for homeless families. Her daughter sat in the front row, wearing a pretty new dress, beaming with pride. The studio owner had arranged everything, turning their story into an opportunity to help others. All proceeds would go to local shelters and programs supporting families in need, the same shelters that had once helped them survive their darkest days. Peeking through the curtain, the mother saw familiar faces in the audience. There was the kind street cleaner who'd helped them find their safe corner, now wearing his Sunday best. The shelter director sat nearby, accompanied by some of the children from the music program. Even the hotel staff who'd served them breakfast on that first morning of hope had come to show their support. Backstage, she touched the simple silver necklace her daughter had given her that morning, bought with money saved from her allowance. For luck, her little girl had said, eyes shining. The mother had cried then, remembering how just a year ago they couldn't afford even a simple meal. The studio owner appeared beside her, offering a reassuring smile. "Ready?" he asked gently. The mother nodded, thinking of all the other families still out there, singing their own songs of survival on street corners across the city. Tonight was for them. As she stepped onto the stage, the lights felt warm on her face. The audience fell silent, waiting. She took a deep breath and began to sing, not a cover song this time, but her own composition about hope, survival, and the power of human kindness. Her voice, stronger and more confident than ever, filled the concert hall. From her spot on stage, she could see her daughter mouthing the words along with her. They'd written this song together, sitting at their small kitchen table, putting their journey into lyrics that might give others strength. The chorus spoke of rainbows after storms, of music in the darkest nights, of dreams that refused to die. The audience listened in complete silence, many wiping away tears. In the back of the hall, she spotted several families from the shelter where she volunteered, their children sitting up straight, eyes wide with hope. This could be them someday. That was the message she wanted to share. As she moved into her final song of the night, she chose the one that had changed everything, Amazing Grace. But this time, she wasn't singing for spare change or survival. She was singing for everyone who had ever needed a miracle, for every parent fighting to give their child a better life, for every dream that seemed impossible until someone stopped to listen. Her daughter joined her on stage for this last song, their voices blending just as they had on their street corner. But now they stood in the spotlight, their story a testament to the power of music and human kindness. The audience rose to their feet, moved by the sight of mother and daughter standing together, singing not of hardship anymore, but of triumph. After the concert, they stood in the lobby, greeting people who wanted to help support the cause. Many shared their own stories of struggle and survival. Her daughter handed out flyers for the shelter's new music program, proud to be part of something bigger than themselves. Later that night, as they walked home to their apartment, they passed their old corner. Someone else was there now, singing quietly in the darkness. The mother and daughter looked at each other, understanding passing between them. They crossed the street together and stopped to listen. And just as a luxury car had once stopped for them, they stopped for this singer, ready to share the hope that had been given to them. Because sometimes, the mother thought as she reached for her daughter's hand, the end of one rainbow becomes the beginning of another's. And every song of survival deserves to be heard.